Czemu ich widno?
Oh yeah. Yep.
I think that's what the
Okay, a very good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Kirklees Climate and Environment Hustings. These have been organised by Huddersfield Friends of the Earth on this day today, which is marked as Earth Day, the 22nd of April. So happy Earth Day to you all. I'm Kiran Bali. I've been invited to chair tonight's hustings. I'm based in Huddersfield and I am a global interfaith activist working primarily on global climate initiatives. You've got three question masters here today in Gareth, Louise and Richard, and also Chailey, who's going to be our technical person. She'll be pressing the right buttons and making sure the candidates all keep to time. As you know, hustings and election debates are a vital part of our electoral and democratic system. They enable you as voters to scrutinise the candidates and the political parties and to hear their responses to the issues that concern you most. The climate and ecological emergency are two of those key issues. The challenges, as we know, facing Kirklees councillors to tackle these are immense. The solutions affecting every aspect of our lives as Kirklees residents, from the homes we live in, the buildings we use for work, education, healthcare, and so many things. The way we move around Kirklees and beyond, and the very nature of the communities we spend our time in. As voters, we need to understand where climate and nature sit in the priority list of each local party. How are they going to address these issues? Because address them, they must. Our councillors have a huge part to play in tackling these emergencies with their formal powers and resources in areas such as housing, planning, transport, waste, local green space, air pollution, and much, much more. You may recall that in early 2019, Kirklees declared a climate emergency, and they set a target of achieving net zero by 2038. We really need ambitious local politicians who will accelerate the development and implementation of that action plan to create the radical change that is so much needed in Kirklees to ensure a clean, green future for all the generations to come. As such, we are very grateful to the candidates and local party representatives who are participating in this evening's event. We are looking forward to some great contributions from all of them. As we couldn't run a hustings for each ward in Kirklees, we asked the main political parties in Kirklees to put forward a representative to speak at the hustings here today. The local political representatives with us tonight, and thank you for joining, in alphabetical order. We have Andrew Cooper from the Green Party. We have David Horn from the Conservative Party, Andrew Marchington from the Liberal Democrats, and Dathan Tedesco from the Labour Party. Welcome to you all. We are all looking forward to some vigorous debate between the candidates. What we would ask of them and of you is to ensure that the debate, whilst being challenging and vigorous, also demonstrates respect for others, and that we create a safe and inclusive space for all of us. It goes without saying that we will not tolerate abusive or discriminatory language, either from the candidates or the participants. However, we do encourage you to participate fully in this debate tonight. You can use the chat box facility to respond to candidates. And we'd also encourage you to share tonight's proceedings and your reaction on social media using the very pertinent hashtag #TakeClimateAction. Hopefully we won't have any technical problems tonight, but if we do, please use the chat box to send a message to our tech host, Shaylee. She will sort out all the technical problems. And before we start, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. Firstly, this event is being recorded. As audience members, your sound or your video will not be visible on the recording, but what you write in the chat box might be there along with your name. This recording will be later shared on the Huddersfield Friends of the Earth website. Secondly, automatic transcription has been turned on for this event, and that will help ensure that those hard of hearing or those with insecure internet connection will be able to understand what is being said. As the transcription is automatic, it goes without saying it isn't 100% perfect and it does make mistakes. You can hide these transcription subtitles at any time by clicking on the 3 dots at the bottom of the Zoom window and click Hide Subtitles. So in order to maintain fairness, we will be allocating equal amounts of time to each candidate. Shaylee will indicate through hand signals when there's 15 seconds to go of a candidate's allotted time. And candidates, please be warned, you will be muted if you overrun. So let's get on with this show. I'm going to ask the candidates to introduce themselves, and then we will go into the questions section of the evening. The questions we're going to have today were created by members of the Huddersfield Friends of the Earth group, and they reflect the areas that they are currently campaigning on in Kirklees. The questions have been sent to the candidates in advance, as the candidates wanted to have a chance to reflect on them. And we have tried to cover a broad range of issues that have been raised at other recent hustings events. The range of topics covered shows how complex addressing the climate and nature emergencies is, and the wide range of issues that the successful councillors will have to contend with. So, our hustings speakers, we'd like you to introduce yourselves and set out in 3 minutes. 3 minutes, your response to the following 2 questions. And the first question is, what are your key policies to address the climate emergency in Kirklees? Second question is, how would your party ensure that tackling the climate and ecological emergency is a priority in all the actions and decisions of the local authority? It's a bit of a long-winded one, but in the 3 minutes, we'd ask you to cover those 2 questions, but to start with a little bit of an introduction. And the running order is, I'm going to go first to Dathan Tedesco from the Labour Party, please.
Evening, everyone. Thanks, Kiran, and thanks to Friends of the Earth for hosting this and for playing the incredibly important role you do in our democracy. You cannot separate the climate emergency from other issues of social and economic justice. I want to say that first. Those disproportionately affected by the climate emergency generally are those facing intersectional disadvantages in other ways, particularly in the global south, women and indigenous communities. But this is also evident here in Kirklees. There's a direct correlation between the areas of the poorest air quality, the lowest concentration of green space, and the areas of the highest deprivation. The climate emergency has been driven by greed, overconsumption, and a commitment to economic gains at the cost of human life. This dynamic is what's driven me into politics, and tackling it starts here at home. Labour in Kirklees has a record over the last few years of tackling the climate emergency as a local authority. That's not warm words, it's actions. We're not just talking about it, we're doing it. Despite being the 3rd worst funded local authority in the country when deprivation is taken into account. Part of the reason I'm standing is pride in this record and the determination to embed it still further, because we do need to go further, much, much further. I look forward to your questions tonight, and I'll pick up on some of the policy specifics through these. And I've got some good news as well to announce to you all tonight. I'll come to in the questions. For me personally, to introduce myself a little bit, I work in the transport sector, and I'm particularly interested in how we can use and improve our transport networks to support work on the climate crisis. I'm also a trade unionist. And I've got a big interest in the future of work and in policies like UBI, a 4-day week, and more inclusive working practices. That won't fix the climate crisis overnight, but it's a part of how we can move to a greener and more sustainable way of life altogether. And there's a pragmatic environmental focus to that too. People working 0-hour contract jobs and still struggling to put food on the table, quite simply don't have the financial or emotional resources to overhaul their lives to be zero waste. That needs to be addressed. I want to be pragmatic too. You know, the last century has been one of stripping away power from local authorities, which has been in reckless hyperdrive in the last 11 years of Tory and LibDem austerity. Our capacity to completely fix the issues facing our environment are limited, particularly pitted against the might of global business and multinational corporations and the central government in bed with property developers. We've done some really good things in control of the council, but I'd look to improve our influence and potential to a combined authority level and beyond. Some of the best things councillors achieve is not just using the levers of the council, but by using their political platform to push for wider structural change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dathan. I'd like to go now to Andrew Marchington from the Liberal Democrats.
Yeah, thank you, Kiran, and thank you, Friends of the Earth, for organising hustings. It's great to be here. I'm Andrew Marchington, Deputy Leader of the Kirklees Liberal Democrat Group. I'm also a member of Green Liberal Democrats. I mean, the biggest policy, Liberal Democrat policy locally, the policy that's made the biggest difference in people's lives is Kirklees Warm Zone. Started in 2007 and completed in 2010. It's 10 years ago now, and the amount of the amount of impact that's had on people's lives for a £21 million investment is phenomenal. And it would be interesting. I've seen the figures about actually the cost savings to people, but it'd be interesting to know actually what the carbon impact of that Kirklees Warm Zone has been over the last 10 years. We're committed to the climate emergency, tackling the climate emergency in Kirklees. We've been actively involved in the climate emergency group, and through scrutiny, we've been involved in challenging some of the things that the council's been doing, and look forward to do that. And it's interesting. I think we've done a lot of work on the low-hanging fruit in Kirklees in terms of carbon reduction, but we need to go much further than that. And one of the things that Liberal Democrats are keen to look at in the future, and I am personally, is about carbon sequestration. If we're going to go to carbon neutral and beyond, we need to be doing that. If people looked at our budget, you'd see some significant policies that we're wanting to implement. Green vehicle, electric vehicle leasing scheme to make that type of transport available to everybody was key. Electric electric charging points on lighting columns was another one. Letting people, residents in Kirklees, know about the importance of climate emergency by using messages in and around our major centres. And a couple of things I think we're going to explore in more detail in the questioning. The deposit return scheme. And I think we think there's something really important with local manufacturing about if we can recycle materials locally using our great manufacturing industry. That works really well with deposit return. If we look at Norway, where they not only implemented a deposit return scheme, reverse vending, but actually they made sure that materials had to be recycled close to where they were collected. And there was a real input in manufacturing there. And obviously, COVID has had a massive impact on people's work lives in Kirklees in the last 12 months. People are getting to terms, most people are getting to terms with working from home where they can do. And that's provided, there's been some negatives to that, but also some positives in terms of reduced travel. And we want to see the council seeing how we can make home working really as effectively as possible and use that as an exemplar. And perhaps there's other businesses who can actually use that as well. So those are some of our policies, and we'll touch on some of the other things during your questions in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew Marchington. Let's now go over to David Hall from the Conservative Party.
Good evening. My name is David Hall. I'm the leader of the Conservatives in Kirklees. Thank you for the invitation to join you this evening. Thank you as well for notification of the questions in advance. I'm sure someone that is as steeped in the environment as some of my colleagues will be able to answer these off the top of my head. I've had to do a little research, and I hope you won't think any less of me because I've had to do that. I do have a background some years back. I was a member of the Conservative administration in Kirklees from 2006 to 2009, and for some of that time, cabinet member for the transport and the environment. at a time when actually we were leading the councils in England in some of the things we were doing. You've already heard of warm zone. That, of course, was in place. The Liberal Democrats had, of course, the Greens were the driving force behind that. We took it over, and because we sold the shares in Leeds Bradford Airport, we were able to make that free. We were also investing quite heavily in wind and PV at the time, and carbon budgeting, and it was quite an exciting time. And I do think that we've slipped back since then. There are plenty of things which we think we ought to be doing more of to help the environment and to highlight what we can do about climate change. Our recycling rates are pitifully low at the moment compared to what they were. We need cleaner, we need smarter public transport. We need a proper tourism policy, which would persuade people to take their holidays in the nice places we have, rather than wanting to jet across the world. And from planning policy regarding no building on floodplains to the environmental efficiency of our houses, the council has a part to play. Also in the way that the council works and the smarter working, there seems to be no sense in employing people who do one job across the whole of the borough and fly between it in a car all day. And I think with smarter local working, we can use our workforce a lot better, keeping them local, home working, and also using our public buildings more effectively, getting the energy efficiency of those buildings a lot better, the heating and lighting. So I'll leave that there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, let's go over to Andrew Cooper from the Green Party, please.
And thank you from me as well for organising the hustings this evening. And because it's important to get this debate out there. We don't have this sort of debate nearly enough at Kirklees Council, and I really wish there was more of it. We've heard a bit so far tonight about our records and the things that we've achieved. Kirklees Warm Zone has been mentioned a couple of times. I'll remind people that it was a Green Party amendment to the budget in 2007, which made Kirklees Warm Zone free. And it was by making it free that 50,000 homes were insulated across Kirklees, and that's what made it a special scheme compared with other warm zones around the country. And so that was one of the things. And you know, to be utterly fair, the Conservatives were actually a good party to actually work with in this particular instance. And you know, I've got to be fair. You know, they were. You know, I found them good people to work with. And I'm more than happy to give credit where it's due to others who do so. And the Liberal Democrats played a part in that. The only party who voted against Kirklees Warm Zone was the Labour Party. And it was a good time. We managed to do quite a lot of those 3 or 4 years. We got the recharge scheme, which provided the first ever solar panels in the country that were installed with no upfront costs before the feed-in tariff, where a second charge was placed on a property, and people were able to put solar panels in the house and pay for them effectively when they sold their property, and that was incredibly popular and was the winner of the British Renewable Energy Awards in 2008. So it was that innovative scheme that it gained that amount of attention. So I think with a lot of this sort of thing, trust is important in terms of what you've done. But looking forward, I'm a big fan of the Passive House scheme, of Passive House standards. And one of the things we put forward is the idea of a green building fund, which covers the additional cost of building to Passive House standards. So we're looking at 5 to 7% on top of the costs of a normal build, according to the Passive House Trust. And we've had terrible problems over the last 3 or 4 years trying to get that through to the Labour administration. Am I getting my 15 seconds here? I reckon I can talk more about this in the questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and thank you to all of our panellists. We will now move to the 10 questions for the panellists, who will each have 1 minute to answer the question. And our first question master is Gareth.
Hello, thank you very much, Kiran. First question is on Leeds Bradford Airport. Expanding Leeds Bradford Airport will substantially increase greenhouse gas emissions, increase air and noise pollution. The government's independent advisors, the Committee for Climate Change, have said that there should be no growth in UK airport capacity until at least 2035. What is your party's position on the airport expansion, and do you support the call for a public inquiry into the airport's expansion? How do you feel about the West Yorkshire Combined Authority to pay for road and access infrastructure, such as the new Parkway station? So the first, this goes to Andrew Marchington first, please.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, obviously the business model for air travel has changed in a fundamental way, and we do not believe that it's the right time for anybody to be looking to expand Leeds Bradford Airport. We believe that the strategy was built on a flawed model anyway. It was looking at increased air travel, and that we don't think that's sustainable in the long run. And we're going to have there's going to be a big change to leisure and business travel in the future, and that needs to reduce the amount of flying that people do and not increasing it. And again, we don't think the numbers stack up for the investment from Wyker either. If the station would genuinely reduce car travel to Leeds Bradford, then that might be a good thing to do. But we believe that the increased travel, the journeys to increase to the airport are based on increased flying, which we don't think is sustainable.
Thank you very much, Andrew. So you're going to go to David Hall next, please, for this one.
Thanks. To the first question, no, I'm not in favour of the airport expansion either. I think the airport is in the wrong place. I think we have to manage as a country with fewer flights, particularly holiday flights. And the demand, of course, during the pandemic has gone through the floor. I can't see it ever picking up. I don't think it makes any sense at all, either from an environmental or a financial point of view, to be enlarging the airport. The second part of the question, though, is about the infrastructure. And there I would part company from what Andrew just said. I think we do have to invest in the infrastructure to make it cope with what is there now, because it's not fair to local residents that live near that airport that they're having to put up with a lot of the congestion is there. And if we could ease that, it would actually make their lives better.
Thank you very much, David. Over to Andrew Cooper next, please.
So as the questions, yes, I support a public inquiry into the airport's expansion. I think it's wrong, straightforwardly. No, I don't believe any public money should be used to pay for road access or infrastructure. I think that's just out of line. I mean, the day that the planning decision was made to support the increase of the terminal, which is part of the expansion plan, the French government had turned down the expansion of Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport. And I thought that at that time that that planning committee would see the signals that were made and vote against. So I was incredibly disappointed when they didn't. And I'm pleased to say that the Green Party member, and my position is the same as the Green Party's position. I think we're here as people who are representing our party. So we've got to be careful when people say I. So yes, I oppose.
Thank you. And finally to Dathan Tedesco, please.
Thanks. I'm against the airport expansion. I don't believe it should be given public money whatsoever. We need to be looking at ways to reduce our reliance on air travel, and I'm utterly unconvinced by the argument that the increase in emissions will be offset by reducing travel from Manchester. It's quite unambiguously. As a former employee of the Combined Authority, I want to be really clear. The Combined Authority receives money from the government almost with strict conditionality. Kirklees are at the table and administering that and in scrutinising these decisions. but the combined authority doesn't receive money directly from Kirklees to spend on road and access infrastructure. You know, this set of elections won't influence the makeup of the combined authority. I don't think, and I don't believe in using the combined authority as a whipping boy to sort of make party political points. It's cheap and it's wrong. Yep, the final decision on the airport expansion rests with Leeds City Council. I don't think that's right. I don't think it should just rest with them. I think the government should look at overhauling how these decisions are made generally, absolutely. But I don't think this government will do that.
Thank you very much. And over to Louise for the next question, please.
Thank you very much. So the next question is around equality. So the struggles for equality and climate justice are interlinked. A Friends of the Earth report last summer highlighted the lack of access to green space for many of our economically and socially deprived communities in West Yorkshire, with people from ethnic minority communities particularly affected. Air pollution and climate change disproportionately affects disadvantaged groups. How will your party try to address this inequality and its impacts on the people of Kirklees? And that question goes to David Hall first, please.
Thank you. Yes, it is a very important question. You may know that we have an Inequalities Commission, which has now been renamed the Inclusion Commission in Kirklees, which all parties are playing their part of. And it seems to me that this should be one strand of that, is access to green space and access to clean air. Green space, of course, should be an integral part of any planning consideration. I think more so now, we have seen during the pandemic that people are willing to use green spaces to take advantage of the natural habitat around us, but also our parks and green spaces for exercise and things. In terms of air pollution, we definitely need to do more on that front. The government has said about the diesel engines, and we need to make sure that we combat the effects of air pollution locally. Sorry, I'm going to be cut off. Thank you.
Thank you. And the same question to Andrew Cooper.
Well, I represent, I'm a governor on a school in Lockwood, Mount Pleasant School. And one of the great things they've been doing, and they've got a 90% of the school intake are Asian from the Muslim community. And they've got 2 minibuses, which they have just purchased so they can take kids out to Castle Hill, Yorkshire Sculpture Park, only a few miles away, to actually get out into the countryside around them, places which are so close yet often are not seen. And so I think a lot of the work that we can actually do that benefits communities is getting people oft times within a few miles of where they live, and getting that out to some of the kids there will make that more visible to parents within the area as well. So I think one of the things I would really like to with schools is make sure we do more to enable them to access the countryside. Okay.
Thank you very much. And then same question to Dathan Tedesco.
Thanks. You absolutely cannot separate the struggle for equality and the struggle for climate justice. In Kirklees and all across the country, you can travel within the same postcode area and find a difference of several years in life expectancy, purely because of air pollution. It's absolutely a social justice issue. Labour's local plan, opposed or abstained on by all 3 of these guys here, supported the preservation of urban green space as a top priority. It put it right at the centre of it, opposed by David, and whipped all his councillors voted against that. But I think it's fair to say the COVID pandemic's revealed just how much work there is still to do to ensure everyone has access to green space, the lungs of a community. And it's a good time to be thinking about this. Every ward in Kirklees contains some areas of natural beauty, and the pandemic's renewed a sense of value in those. So when we think about local green spaces, yep, I'm in favour of both a higher level of strategic vision that prioritises them, and the Labour Council agrees with this, and they're doing this, and also a very localised, case-by-case, concerted effort to take advantage of the unprecedented public goodwill around those at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least to Andrew Marchington, please.
Yeah, thank you. Quality of environment is an index of multiple declaration, and we need to make sure that that's maintained. The local development framework, which precedes a local plan, actually protected more greenfield sites than the current plan. And unfortunately, the area where I live, a lot of the greenfield is being built around the village, and it's cutting people off from access to the communities. We've got Peak District National Park. It's celebrating its 70th anniversary this year, and that was about ordinary people from urban areas being able to get out into the countryside. I mean, just to build on what Andrew Cooper said, it'd be interesting if children from Lockwood could use the train to get out into, say, use the Penistone line to get out to Barnsley and walk on some of the Barnsley Walk. I know Marsden in the Colne Valley, children from Batley get on the train there, and you can walk into the Peak District from there. So it's trying to creatively about using existing services.
Thank you very much. And I pass over now to Richard for the next question.
Thank you, Louise. The next question is about the zero carbon pledge. Do you agree that Kirklees should set a target date of no later than 2030 to reach net zero emissions for our whole area, as laid out in the climate pledge for zero carbon? And there is a website, pledge2030.uk. And this question, to start with, goes to Andrew Cooper.
The easy answer is yes. The harder answer is how. 2038 is a tough target to reach a zero carbon economy. And it's tougher if you take the wrong policy decisions. And so, yes, I believe in 2030. Yes, I think we should work towards it. I'm flabbergasted a lot of the time that our council at the moment is believing is backing airport expansion as it has done, is actually putting is blocking passive house standards for new build, blocking all sorts of projects which would actually reduce carbon emissions, and it's not sort of it, and so I really want to make sure that 2030 target is hit, but we need to change policies.
Thank you, Andrew. And Dathan, Tedesco, please.
Thanks, Richard. I think it's a positive pledge, and I'd be happy to see Kirklees sign up for it, absolutely. However, it does feel to me that the sort of environmental movement often has an over-reliance on pledges and targets, which often don't go hand in hand with root and branch restructures of things like how we view jobs and our society's obsession with economic growth. I'm not against the use of target dates at all, and promises as a focal point for politicians and organisations, and as a catchy way of getting issues on the table. So yeah, I do absolutely support this. But if Kirklees missed the target and achieved some more concrete and lasting progress in other areas, yeah, fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Dathan. And Andrew, please.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fully supportive of targets, but it's how you get to them. I mean, the biggest impact on this target is ironically probably the election of Joe Biden as president of the United States, and that's actually looking at the two major polluters in the world, the United States and China, working towards reducing their levels of coal use, fossil fuel use. And we need to be aware of that. We can do as much as we can to reduce carbon, but we're going to have to move towards carbon capture and carbon sequestration. And Kirklees needs to play its part, but also look at the global picture. So one of the things we've been looking at is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, which again is, it produces electricity, it captures the carbon, it's a sustainable resource, and actually locks up carbon for hundreds of years. And we're going to have to get to that stage. Yes, meet the zero carbon target, but we're going to have to go beyond that, because if we don't start reducing the levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, then we're setting up, long-term problems for everybody, not just problems now.
Thank you, Andrew. And finally, to David Hall, please.
Yeah, thank you. As regard the targets, it seems to me that actually the government has much more sway over influencing people's behaviours and choices, and the choices and behaviours of business than the council does. And therefore, it seems to me that if we were to go ahead with our own target dates when we want to see to achieve that are out of kilter with the government's ambitions, we may come a cropper, because we're going to be trying to push it faster than things are likely to happen. I mean, we have heard, I think, really good announcements yesterday and today, both from the UK government and from the US government, which I was delighted to hear. But as for 2030, well, I think really we should commit to making the ambitions step by step, hand in hand with what the government's doing, rather than a kind of a bidding war as to who can get there first.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone. And it's back to Gareth now for question 4.
Thank you. Green jobs are desperately needed in Kirklees. For a real green recovery after the COVID crisis, we need good, well-paid, secure jobs in organisations owned by and for the public. What role will your party play in rebuilding the local economy by creating jobs in health and social care, education, public transport, low carbon building, and jobs that sustain life by growing food or enrich it by making art within Kirklees? This goes to Dathan Tedesco first, please.
Thanks, Gareth. Before we can start creating any of these things, all of which I absolutely believe will be good things, and all of which I absolutely support, we have to acknowledge that we're battered from a decade of austerity and privatisation. And thanks to that, even if we could create this world tomorrow, our citizens are not necessarily in a place to be able to easily fit into it. In a moment, the pro-austerity parties can explain why they've supported this and why the parties have so mistreated local government in this way. I also want to resist this idea that every worthwhile contribution to society has to be a job. You know, you haven't mentioned people who care for their own families, predominantly, but not exclusively women. I know they should be supported and valued. Actually, and I believe this is the real green alternative, we should create a society where people can carry out the work they feel most enriches their lives and not be penalised for it. Some of the steps we take towards that are not things that the council can achieve overnight or unilaterally, but the things we can help shift the public mood on. Also, yeah, I'm a trade unionist, and I want to make sure that Kirklees itself is a major employer and anchor institution with the power to influence companies and sectors where we have. Hello?
Hello?
Was I muted for the whole thing? Shall I go again?
Just the last few seconds.
Oh, okay, fine. Thanks, Andrew. Always informative.
Good.
So I think next we go to Andrew Marchington.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Dathan's own councils on Kirklees Council have admitted that Labour haven't funded local government as they should have done over the years anyway, so we need to, there's an issue to revisit about that. The thing that's missing from the list is about manufacturing. I mean, Kirklees is the third largest manufacturing district in the country. There's lots of innovative technologies that can be used. I would like to see Kirklees companies reusing recyclable materials, remanufacturing them, actually manufacturing materials that are easier to recycle. And I support all of the other things we're saying about that, but that's a really, it's really important. We get our young people aspiring to be apprentice engineers or apprentice chemical engineers involved in manufacturing, so that there's that real link between the products we use, how we recycle them, and how we can reuse them and reduce our resource impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Over to David Hall next, please.
Thank you. I think the answer is to make the economic environment thrive alongside the natural environment. And that means nurturing business, and it means talking to businesses, listening to businesses, and engaging with businesses, which is something which is not going on to any great degree at the moment. Encouraging businesses to expand in an environmentally friendly way. They are willing to do this. A lot of businesses are now putting forward ideas where they can expand, and the buildings and the premises will be really good, examples of how we can do this. Because the only way that the council will be able to add value to our local communities is if we have the money to do it, and the only way to get that money is to produce business rates, and that means propping up, making sure that we encourage businesses to relocate here and to thrive, and then we'll have the money to invest in the arts and all the other things that we want to see.
Thank you. And same question to Andrew Cooper, please, as well.
Well, what business really wants, and you always hear it, is certainty. They want certainty. They want an understanding that if they're going to invest, that it's going to be worth investing in. And one of the real problems we've had with the energy efficiency and the green sector more generally is the stop-start programs, the scheme which gets changed halfway through, changed several times. We've got the Green Homes Grant, which was cancelled very recently. And how can a business invest in the people it needs? So we need a plan, we need funding, we need a timetable, and we need that to last several years for businesses to be able to invest, to be able to do those things. And that applies not just for business, but across those sectors as well.
Thank you. And back into Louise for the next question, please.
Thank you very much. So the next question is about road building. As you'll be aware, there's considerable local concern about climate and ecological impacts of road building and expansion plans within Kirklees, including the A629 road widening scheme at Edgerton, which involves the felling of 126 mature trees. What is your position on new road schemes within Kirklees, and do you support a moratorium of all road building schemes until their climate impact can be addressed? And I'm going to go first to Andrew Marchington, please.
Yeah, we support the moratorium on road building until the climate impact is assessed. We think that all ought to be done for all of them. Our councillors in the Linley ward believe actually that the Edgerton Road scheme actually is carbon neutral, will reduce carbon emissions and will improve air quality. It's an air quality monitoring zone, and they've got monitoring down there. And but we're happy to see that revisited. Nobody wants to see mature trees chopped down, but actually to improve the air quality of the environment, sometimes that you have to take those sorts of measures. And I do know that there's been lots of tree planting already going on in Linley, but that's a long-term thing, and we need to be planting trees now for the future, for the next 50 to 100 years to do that. And also they're looking at other ways of reducing climate impact in the Linley ward. Thank you.
Thank you. And the same question to David Hall, please.
Yeah, certainly to the assessment of climate impact, yes, I would be in favour of that. I'm in favour of carbon budgeting alongside financial budgeting and all the things that go into the consideration of these schemes. But we've also to remember that some of these schemes are actually devised to try and improve the environment by cutting congestion and therefore air pollution at some really busy points. So as to the moratorium, I'm not sure whether that is a good idea in every case. I have a particular junction in my ward which has extremely bad air quality, and it needs something doing now. The plans are there. We need to try and get rid of the congestion, and so people aren't suffering from things which are brought about by poor air quality. So I would say for a moratorium, no, but let's get on with the environmental assessments.
Thank you. And then to Andrew Cooper, please.
So yes, I support a moratorium. Yes, I oppose the A629 scheme, particularly to Edgerton, where the 126 trees are threatened with closure. As regards to carbon impact assessment tool, I think we've actually got to look at the carbon impact assessment tool and look over it. I mean, I'm quite clear that whenever I talk to people who are looking at that junction at the A629, that they don't regard it as congested. People who live there don't regard it as congested. It's not so much an air quality issue. And if you think about the emission standards for vehicles going forward, those emissions are going to become less of an issue as time goes on, as we get more and more electric vehicles. So the air quality issue is, I think, quite bogus being put forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And last but not least, Dathan Tedesco.
I do think we should look at carbon impact of each and every road scheme. I think that largely happens already, as I understand it, but yeah, let's formalise that, absolutely. However, I don't support a moratorium on all road schemes. I think there are some, the others have sort of said it, I think there are some road schemes that should be looked at for the positive benefits they can and would bring, and I've supported them directly in my own campaign. The current arterial road network in and around Huddersfield, it's not sufficient. You know, certain areas of our town are dogged by heavy traffic flows, idling cars, and the result of this is about life expectancy, as I've gone into. You know, that's not a status quo that I support. You know, 3-year-old children in Milnes Bridge getting asthma, you know, that's not a status quo that I support, quite simply. You know, the ultimate solution is a major reduction in personal car ownership, a reduction in the number of car journeys, you know, and there's an over-reliance on high emission technology. So yeah, I believe we need to look at the immediate consequences and make a decision on short to medium term priorities. If you disagree, okay, but that's my view on it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to Richard for the next question.
Thank you, Louise. So question 6 is about passive house. So buildings make a significant contribution to climate change. Local authorities, including Exeter, Norwich, Glasgow and York, are embracing the International Passive House Low Energy Building Standard for new buildings on their own land. What is your party's position on passive house within Kirklees, and do you have plans for tackling the retrofit of existing buildings? And we'll start with David Hall, please.
Thanks. I was for a time a member of a policy committee at Kirklees, where we talked about the passive house standard, and where I found out quite a bit about it. I'm in a dilemma about it applying to most developments, and the reason is that although I find that passive house is a laudable objective because it achieves a lot of what we're trying to do, we have to acknowledge that there's a balance between the cost of that and whether or not actually it might drive down the rate of development, because we are in need of housing in the borough, of the right type of housing and in the right place. And I wouldn't want to dissuade people from developing here where it's badly needed if they're just going to go to another borough where they can do it a lot cheaper. So we do have other considerations. I'm sorry, I've run out of time.
Thank you, David. And to Andrew Cooper, please.
Yes, support passive house. Yes, I think it ought to be used for public projects, particularly social housing. And I propose a green building fund to actually make that happen. It's been blocked. A lot of the arguments against it are bogus, usually looking at one-off schemes and using those to get the costs. It's the Labour administration which has blocked passive house in Kirklees and it being used. There was an all-party passive house group which recommended using the passive house standard for new build. And I look at things like Birkby Library and think, why is that not being built to the passive house standard? Why is that not happening? And huge opportunities being missed. And of course, doing the passive house standards means that energy costs go down as well. So it's financially a really good thing to do as well.
Thank you, Andrew. And Dathan, please.
I'm absolutely delighted to announce tonight that after lobbying from myself and from other Labour Party members, the administration is going to look at a significant passive house pilot. Plans are being drawn up for this as we speak. It's already underway, and councils will be consulted on these after the election, including you, Andrew, if you're re-elected. I've read about passive house, and it's a good thing. We should look at it. It's not a silver bullet, and the administration will also look more broadly at other standards and methodologies too. But the plan a significant big pilot using passive house. Of course, we should insist upon the best ecological standards we possibly can in all the building works as far as we can. We can't always compare ourselves to other local authorities. We've got to work with the land we've got and the leverage that we've got. I think we need to consider the massive scale of the housing crisis that we have in this country, and our policies need to address that. I don't speak for the administration, but I can speak to the administration, and I can deliver things, as this shows.
Thank you, Dathan. And last but not least, Andrew, please.
I mean, Dathan's just given a real good example of why green issues have been held up in Kirklees by the Labour administration. We had a all-party group, we agreed to it, it was held up, and then the surprises with this pilot. Why are we piloting? I mean, Andrew and I went down to Kelham Island, a fantastic project down there. The numbers stack up. It breaks my heart that Norwich won the City Council won the Sterling Prize for building hundreds of socially affordable housing to passive house standard, and Kirklees hasn't. And Labour councillors have been a blockage and all that. We could have been building passive houses at Ashbrow, and we could have been pumping heat from the heat energy plant up there, cost effectively, and the cabinet member didn't even know about it. So yeah, we support passive house. I mean, K&H is looking at retrofitting. We supported that. Yeah, financial funds to support that but new build, passive house principles. Build passive house where you can, and if not, you use passive house principles. Because of the 80% of houses you can do passive house. So yeah, fine with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for your answers to the passive house question. It's Gareth now.
Thank you, Richard. This is about active travel. What plans and policies does your party have for the promotion of active travel, such as walking and cycling? This is going to Andrew Cooper first, please.
So there's a really great opportunity coming up with some of the devolved funds which are for place-based working. Some of that is going to go to active travel. And so at the small scale, I think it's very, very basic things, such as places to park your bike within town and village centres. So we're able to do that. So those are one of the things that we're going to be looking at in the Newsome wards. So there are places there for people to actually park their bikes. But the other thing that we really need is to back safe cycle routes right the way across the borough, because and to actually get Kirklees highways working on those sort of schemes. Because at the moment, it's very, very dangerous to be cycling in a lot of places in Kirklees. I know a number of people who've been knocked off their bikes, and we've got to give more people a feeling of safety, and electric bike users as well.
Thank you. Dathan, Tedesco next, please.
We've got real plans backed up with real investment, not just warm words. Labour's budget has an additional 2 million available to deliver active travel schemes across Kirklees in the next year. That's just for this year. The other 3 panellists voted against this. We will develop and new and improved bus stations, walkways, cycle routes, greater train station access are amongst the biggest regeneration schemes that Labour's got planned. The other 3 panellists voted against this. We're committing 7.9 million over the next year to tackle climate change issues, but over the next 5 years, it'll be 54 million. Funding's being committed to support tree planting and electric charging points, the creation of Huddersfield heat network, air quality, and so much more. The other 3 panellists, the other 3 parties voted against all of this in Kirklees.
Thank you. Andrew Marchington next, please.
We've got big splendid plans on stuff, but I'm not sure that active travel is a real part of that, because people don't understand it. I mean, my son has started cycling. He's cycling 100 miles a week to work and back. He's really well aware of the issues, particularly getting from Golcar through Huddersfield down to Leeds Road, and I'm hoping that he's going to have some way of inputting into some of these schemes. You can't put white lines on the road. We know that doesn't work. It's about infrastructure that works for pedestrians and for cyclists to make that really practical. I mean, it's what Andrew Cooper said about electric bikes around here. I mean, we're not in the flattest part of the world. It's a bit easier in Cambridgeshire than it is in Kirklees, but you need to think of ways of how people can use those sort of ideas. So we do need investment, but active travel needs to be at the heart of those, not as an afterthought, not as a bolt-on.
Thank you. And last but not least, David Hall, please.
Thank you. Yeah, to associate myself with most of what's been said, it's all good stuff. Dathan didn't tell you that, of course, none of our amendments sought to take any of that out of the budget at all. We were all in agreement with it, and I'm glad we were. But there's also another part that we have to play, which is to do with planning policy, because planning policy should ensure that when we're creating neighbourhoods in which people want to live, it includes employment, it includes retail, it includes education and recreation and healthcare, so that people can readily get to where they want to go without the need to hop in the car. And that means that if people can get to where they want to go by walking or cycling more easily, that's what they're going to do. So there's that part of it as well. And let's be really proactive about encouraging people to walk and to cycle, not just because it's better for the environment, but because it's better for their health as well. And that will really pay off in the future.
Thank you very much. And the next question is going to be on public transport. So how would you improve bus and rail services within Kirklees? Do you support bringing buses back into local authority ownership, as has recently occurred in Greater Manchester? And I'm going to go to Dathan first for this question, please.
I support full public ownership of all public transport networks, so they're accountable to and run for the benefit of the public. No ifs, no buts. I'm a transport professional, so I would say this, but you absolutely cannot underestimate the importance of transport in people's lives. When Kirklees last surveyed its young people, which it does every 2 years, Andrew Marchington apparently doesn't know that, transport was a major reason why lots of young people felt lonely and isolated. That's equally true for older people. You can't tackle things like air quality or debates about road widening without having good public transport system to offer people instead of private car ownership. It just won't happen. And if you leave it to private companies, it just won't happen. There's so much evidence of that in the last 30 years that if you're not willing to admit it, then you've got your head stuck in cloud cuckoo land and neoliberal dogma. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the question now goes to Andrew Marchington.
I think we survey our young people every 3 years, Dathan, but that's neither of my children were asked about cycling to work or to school. So despite the fact they've been doing that for 5 or 6 years now. Yeah, it's probably going to be default. Railways are probably going to default come back into public ownership anyway. But also we need the strategic thinking from local politicians and national politicians to make it work. Are we going to get mainline electrification between Huddersfield, between Leeds and Manchester, and actually extra lines in, so we could use that as a light rail scheme up and down the Colne Valley and other parts of the area. Yeah, Greater Manchester. I mean, funding. I mean, I think London gets it £375 per person extra for London transport for these major schemes, and also we need some real strategic thinking. I think in Manchester, the thing that amazes me is about Oldham. They've totally redesigned the town centre to get trams running through, and that used to have trams running into centre of Huddersfield and trolley buses. Perhaps that's the way we ought to go again.
Thank you. And I will go next to David, please.
I think it's undeniable that COVID has changed this sector of public life quite dramatically, really. Because people, of course, haven't wanted to use public transport in any great degree in the past, and I have to say that it really worries me. It upsets me really to see great big diesel double-decker buses driving around all day with one person on them. I understand we've still got to provide a service to that person that needs it, but in the future, the bus service particularly needs to be a lot, we need smaller buses, we need greener buses, we need it to be a lot more responsive to actually what the passenger wants from where he wants to get on to where she wants to get off. So in terms of trains, reopening of the expansion of the Penistone line certainly would be a plus. As regards public-private ownership, I think there's a bit of a red herring. There's good and bad, and I think a public.
Oh, sorry, David, cut off there, just ran over a little bit. And last but not least, Andrew Cooper.
So yes, bus deregulation has been a failure. Successive Labour and Conservative governments have supported it for 30 odd years, and we've all lost out as a result of that. So yes, I support bringing it back under public control, and that's important. But we've got to look not just at bus services, but we've got to look at the opportunities. I look at places like Tallinn in Estonia, a former Soviet country, now has free public transport, and they get modal shift in a big way. We've got to look at policies like that and think, why can't we apply those here? We've got to look at the mass rapid transit system that is being proposed. What's the timetable for it? When's it going to happen? How is Kirklees going to be a part of that? We've got to look at electrification of our railways and have a rolling programme for electrification, which gives us modern railways, just like they do in Scotland, but not in England.
Thank you, Louise. And thank you, Andrew. So this is a question about waste. So what are your party's policies on waste and recycling for Kirklees? Do you support the goal of becoming a zero waste region, including through backing reuse schemes and the implementation of a deposit return scheme for drink containers? And let's start with Andrew Marchington, please.
Yeah, support zero waste. I think we've touched on this already. We support the deposit return scheme, but we would really like to see the waste that's collected being recycled and repurposed in Kirklees. We see really good examples out of Norway. I've touched on that before, and I think with the manufacturing skills we've got in Kirklees, we could do that. We're supportive of the repair cafe that Liberal Democrats have been involved in the Colne Valley. That's and again we think that at lifetime, look at when everything's produced or manufactured, you need to look at whole life. So whether that's a vehicle, or whether that's a piece of electronic equipment, or whether it's a piece of packaging, what's going to happen to it when it's done? So vehicle manufacturers ought to be taking, they ought to be taking stuff back, and they ought to be the stuff that can be reused in another vehicle ought to be done. So it's stuff like that. So it's long-term thinking. So we reduce the amount of waste we generate, but also the resources we use to to manufacture things. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And David Hall, please.
Yes to zero waste. Yes to reuse schemes. Yes to deposits. All this is all bread and butter to me. I hate waste. Most Conservatives hate waste, and if we can eliminate it, that's brilliant. We have to improve the ease of recycling. That is a definite. We've got to invest in the equipment that will make sure that we can recycle many more things, preferably all from the same bin. And we know that's possible. And the other thing we've got to be smarter at is to operate our tips better, because I know when I've been to the tip, there's all sorts of stuff going in those landfill stroke burning bins, which should not be going in there. And we need to make sure that people know what they can pass on, what they could reuse, what could be recycled. And we need people that are employed at the tips to be very helpful and say, excuse me, can we take some of that out and actually make sure that the amount of stuff going to landfill is minimised as much as we possibly can.
Thank you, David. And Andrew Cooper, please.
Yeah, very much support deposit return schemes and zero waste policies. I first saw a deposit return scheme on a plastic bottle at Munich railway station, and you put your bottle in and a chip comes out and a value is placed on that waste for all sorts of people, and so you don't see plastic bottles lying around. We all remember Ben Shaw's bottles, and you never saw a Ben Shaw's bottle lying around, did you? Because there's a value on it, and so these things are important. Yes, we need to expand our recycling facilities, but we've got to think a lot more about feeding back to government, who have a lot of power here, to reduce the amount of waste that's actually produced in the first place. And so I think we need to obviously do as much as we can at this level, but feed back to government through the Local Government Association.
Thank you, Andrew. And lastly, to Dathan, please.
I can talk about the excellent radical restructure of the waste and recycling services brought about by Labour in Kirklees this year, and opposed and voted against by all the fellow panellists again, and oddly not mentioned by any of them in this answer. That's an important and significant first step, and I'm proud of that. Look, nothing's off the table at all in that in terms of reuse and return schemes. Absolutely, that's being looked at, and that's at the core of that strategy. The strategy these guys voted against. I do support the goal of becoming a zero waste region, but we have to think broadly too. I've talked about some of it already. There's a lot of complex reasons why people don't or can't access schemes like this, and why environment isn't a top priority for some individuals and families, and that needs to change, of course. Thanks.
Thank you, Dathan. And it's over to Gareth now for the last question on divestment.
Thanks very much, Richard. So as I said, this is on divestment. What is your position on fossil fuel investments within the local authority pension fund? How would you protect funds from the risk of stranded assets related to fossil fuel investments? This is going to David Hall first, please.
We wouldn't be in favour of divestment from fossil fuels. There's a simple reason for this, and this is to do, I think, very much in principle versus pragmatism. I tend to take a very pragmatic point on this, because if we divest, it's not as if we're destroying the value of that company or depriving of anything, because all that happens is that other people who are less concerned about the environment buy the shares. So as shareholders, and remember there's £10 billion in pension funds invested in fossil fuels, with the ability and we have the opportunity to influence these companies, why would we want to throw that ability and that opportunity away and sit on the outside and carp and tell them that they're doing it wrong, when actually we could be, as a major shareholder of those companies, trying to influence on what they're doing? And I just think from a pragmatic point of view, that's where we should be.
Thank you very much, David. Andrew Cooper next, please.
I've been going for a number of years about divestment and the need to do this, and bringing this up at council and putting it in front of the representatives of the investment panel on the West Yorkshire Pension Fund, and not getting very far really. And it's really great that the South Yorkshire Pension Fund has divested, and I'm pleased about that. And it's possible in South Yorkshire. Why is it not possible in West Yorkshire? We've got to ask ourselves that question. So yes, we need to divest. We've got to understand the concept of stranded assets, because if we're serious about tackling climate change, they will be stranded assets, and it will make no financial sense to actually hold on to them. And so the case for investing in carbon intensive industries and fossil fuels is bogus, and we've got to stop it.
Thank you very much. David Tedesco next, please.
Yep, support divestment of the pension fund from fossil fuels. As a trade unionist, I have deep concerns pragmatically as well as politically as to how sustainable investing in fossil fuels is. Okay, might pay out for another few years, but some of the people paying into the pension fund right at the start of their careers, one way or another, our reliance on fossil fuels is going to have to reduce over the next 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever years, it's going to have to reduce. So, you know, what are these members going to do? The risk of stranded assets, I think, is slightly overstated. I think we can quite easily build into the pension fund a sustainable strategic portfolio of investments, you know, which are accompanied by a social good and not as inherently unstable as fossil fuels. Of course, the fund should be managed responsibly, and if I was a councillor, I'd seek reassurance on that from our local representation on the governing body. But I do absolutely believe divestment can be achieved without any detriment to contributors. Hope so.
Thank you. And last but not least, Andrew Marchington, please.
Yeah, we support divestment from fossil fuel intensive companies. And again, we see the example in Cumbria of looking to open a new coal mine, and Tim Farron has been quite active in opposing that particular application. So just beggars belief is that. And I think it puts pressures on carbon intensive companies to actually change their business model and to move forward. So we see that both with BP and with Shell. And I think that this is a really useful tool to see that, and these companies are going to, and the assets are going to, I think that again supports some of the issue about stranded assets. It obliges companies to think differently about how they do business.
Thank you very much. And over to Kiran again now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, everyone. We are now coming towards the end of this event this evening. We could have been here till midnight to cover the range of issues that the successful candidate will have to contend with to make Kirklees a clean, green, low carbon place for our generation and our generations to come. Some of the questions that we weren't able to get round to include how to fit solar panels to public buildings, how the panellists feel about the manufacture of pesticides like paraquat within Kirklees, their party's policies to protect trees within Kirklees, how to ensure we develop a circular economy and not send precious resources to incineration or landfill, how to work with businesses to reduce plastic packaging. I'm now going to invite the candidates to give their final pitch of 2 minutes each, and I'm going to start with Andrew Cooper, please.
We've heard a number of things this evening. What I can say is that my view is the Green Party's view, and it's not just a personal view. And that's actually quite an important thing here, because sometimes people speak in a personal capacity, but how they actually vote when it comes to a council meeting could be judged by their whips and decided by those. So you can be sure that what I'm saying represents the Green Party view. And so yes, I will do all I can to, as I have done throughout my political career, I don't really call it a career, to reduce emissions. Yeah, I'll stand by my record, which is okay.
Thank you very much. And now over to Dathan Tedesco, please.
Thank you again to Friends of the Earth for organising this hustings, and let me reiterate my absolute belief that the environment and the climate emergency must be the absolute top priority for politicians of all shades and everyone. This simple fact is the reason why this year, even in the midst of a global pandemic, my party in Kirklees, not me individually, my party stuck its neck out and set the most radical climate budget in the history of this borough. A budget that, again, all three of my fellow panellists voted against. Elect Labour candidates like me, and as I've shown with Passive House, I'll make sure that the budget and the climate emergency declaration aren't the end, they're the beginning for Kirklees. Nationally, Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, we've all got commitments to the environment. We can debate the best way to manifest that, but the underlying belief in the need for immediate actions there, it's common to us. Belief in facts is common to the three of us. But there's one party tonight that don't believe in this. And you've heard it from David, his opening gambit. This is the leader of the Conservative Party in Kirklees. His opening gambit is he had to Google your questions. That's the leader of the Conservative Party. Contempt. The fact that the Conservative Party he represents is in government in our country is a tragic block to the major action on environment. And even when they leave office, they'll have weakened our society and public institutions so greatly that a subsequent positive environmental programme will be less than it should be. So when you're looking down at your ballot paper next month, have a really hard think. Think about what you can do to keep them out. In most wards in Kirklees, a vote for anybody at Labour puts David and his fellow climate change deniers in power. That might be great news if you're open to be given a contract for poor quality PPE. But if you're just a resident of Kirklees who doesn't want our planet to become unlivable in your lifetime, it's a disaster. We've got a duty to make the right decision for our planet, for our children, the other human beings we share the planet with. That's what drove me into politics. Sometimes those decisions aren't easy, but the choice in this election is. Also vote for the Green choice for West Yorkshire Mayor, Labour's Tracy Bravin. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dathan. Now over to Andrew Marchington, please.
Well, obviously, climate change is a political issue, and it's going to need political will and political motivation to deal with it. But to keep repeating that three parties voted against the most radical, climate budget in Kirklees' history. When Kirklees was led in the past by John Harmon, who represented, which was it, the local government association at the Rio Climate Summit. Am I right there, Andrew? You need to know if that's his. Yeah. So, Kirklees had some of the highest recycling rates in the country 15 to 20 years ago. Largest amount of photovoltaic solar energy produced in Kirklees. That is no longer the case, and we see. Actually, all better, Paul Davis is actually a reasonably good cabinet member. He's much more radical on all these things than any of his predecessors were, and it's been very frustrating. We've tried to work together, but we've seen what we've been up against tonight about over politicisation of this issue. Kirklees Liberal Democrats, we've set our case. Actually, if you just look at our budget amendment, which Labour voted against, and you'll see we've got creative solutions to some of these issues. It's not extensive. I mean, we love some of the stuff in Andrew Cooper's budget as well. We've got, particularly around the passive house stuff and some of the financing and stuff. But just providing access to electrical vehicles for people on low incomes. The electrical leasing scheme was rejected by Labour, and then we hear, oh no, we're thinking about it now, but we'll make it our idea. And it isn't, or passive house. Passive house is going to be Labour's idea. It is, he said it tonight. Passive house, Labour's idea, pilot project. Could have happened 5 or 6 years ago. And then, again, if we're talking about greening the workforce, we need people who can think creatively about this. People who can work at home, they should do. People who need to work in the office should do. That will make a massive impact. And Liberal Democrats are behind that with colleagues who are sympathetic to that way of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, and now over to David Hall, please.
Thanks again for the invitation tonight. It's been a pleasure to participate. There is an awful lot of common ground here, I think. Common ground is vital. Common ground is vital between the parties. It's also vital to find common ground with our residents. Despite some of the rather petty party arguments that have been put forward in one corner tonight, I think there is a lot of common ground. We need to find that and we need to build on it. It's an enormous subject. There's two main things I would say. Firstly, we can only make a difference as a council if the entire weight of the corporation is behind this as a priority, and that means tackling climate change is recognised as a priority, if not the priority, and that every single department with the council is working towards the same end. And I would make that commitment if I were to be leader of the council. Secondly, we mustn't fool ourselves that the council could do all this on its own. It's got to be a partnership. It's going to need the council to work with residents, with businesses, with the voluntary sector. We've got to bring on the other public bodies. We've got to influence the government. We've got to have the buy-in, most importantly, from residents themselves, because it's their lifestyles, ultimately our lifestyles, which are going to have to change if we're going to bring any of this about. And again, that's going to need political leadership and a commitment to change. And I am happy to give that assurance that this is what I would do. I don't think there's been a time where this issue has been more hotly debated. I have to say that I think Sir David Attenborough has done us a great service, because the way he's introduced this to a whole new audience has been very measured, but also he's given it the urgency which is required. So now's the time, let's seize it. We can make Kirklees lead the way again.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, so before we close this evening's event, I would like to thank you all for coming along. I'm sure the candidates who have been working so hard on the campaign trail may be tempted to view the 6th of May as the finishing line. But for the successful candidates, that's when the work really starts. And we want to work with the successful candidates to enable them to deliver radical action on climate and nature in Kirklees. We would love you all to be part of this. Huddersfield Friends of the Earth works as part of a network of volunteer-led groups in Kirklees who work together to campaign for that transformational change that the scientific evidence demands. We've posted a link in the chat box. When you click on that link, it will enable you to sign up for some updates on how you can be part of campaigns too. Please do get involved. And we'd also like to flag up that Huddersfield Friends of the Earth is doing an election survey of the positions of Kirklees local election candidates. We'd like to encourage you to ask your candidates to fill that in before midday this Sunday. So with that, I'd like to thank Gareth, Louise and Richard for asking the questions tonight. I'd like to thank Chaley for the great technical support, the fantastic hand gestures. I'd like to thank the whole team at Huddersfield Friends of the Earth who have helped to deliver tonight's event. A big thank you to you all for coming along this evening, and indeed to our panellists for their participation. I hope you have a great week ahead, and please do stay safe. Thank you all once again.
Thank you, Kiran. Thank you. You've been
Thank
brilliant.
you.
Thank you.
Well done.
Yeah. Cheers, everyone. And yeah, the survey link's in the chat box. So please encourage your candidates to fill that in. That would be brilliant. Okay, so we'll, yeah, I don't know.